Hello, my dear. Come, sit with me a moment. I need to tell you something that's been weighing on my chest for years. It all began the morning my son got married, and I kept my mouth shut about one thing: the ranch, his father's ranch, the land where we built our whole life. I didn't say a word, and now, all these years later, thank the Lord above I didn't. Because what came after, it would have destroyed everything. It was a bright June morning, the kind that made the Texas air smell like dust and honeysuckle, and I remember standing outside the chapel in my navy dress, pretending my heart wasn't pounding. Thomas, my only son, was grinning like a schoolboy in that rented tux, waiting at the altar, and his bride, well, I'll be honest with you now, she never did sit right with me. Her name was Elise, and from the moment she stepped into our lives, she had that smile too wide, too white, like something stretched over a lie. But Thomas was in love, blind as a baby bird. And I told myself to hush, to support him, to be the good mother. So I hugged them both, smiled through the ceremony, and when the moment came, I clutched my late husband's will in my handbag and said nothing. Not a single word about the land he'd left me, nor the letter he wrote before he died. That dusty old ranch, 200 acres of mesquite, old barbed wire fences, and memories thicker than sweat in July, it was mine now, mine to keep or give. And I chose silence. What I didn't know was that my silence would save that ranch. Because 6 months into their marriage, things began to unravel. Elise grew sharper, colder. She started asking about money, what Thomas was set to inherit, what properties were in the family. At Christmas, she cornered me in the kitchen and said, smiling too sweet, "Your place out there in Llano must be worth a pretty penny now. Any plans to pass it down?" I remember the way her hand grazed my arm, gentle but firm. Like she was testing the fence line. I played dumb, said it was just old land with bad plumbing and too many snakes. But from then on, I kept my eyes wide open, and what I saw, well, it nearly broke me. Elise started showing up uninvited. It began subtly enough. A Sunday drop-in here, a midweek coffee there. She'd bring some pie or a bouquet of flowers from the farmer's market, acting like the sweet daughter-in-law I'd never asked for. But I've been alive long enough to know when a woman's smiling with her teeth and not her heart. One afternoon, I was out near the old barn repairing a latch on the chicken coop. Bless those stubborn hens. And I saw her white SUV pull up the drive without so much as a warning. I watched from the shadows as she got out, sunglasses on, heels clicking in the dirt, like she was strutting through a showroom instead of a working ranch. She looked around, slow, deliberate, scanning. I didn't step out until I saw her palm rest on the fence post, like she was staking a claim. "Oh, Patricia," she chirped when she noticed me, like she hadn't just been casing the place like a thief. "What brings you all the way out here?" I asked, voice steady, polite. She looked over her shoulder at the land, our land, and said, "Tommy told me he used to run around out here with his dog. It's such a shame it's not being used for anything. Have you ever thought about selling?" I gave a short laugh. "Not for 1 second." She kept that tight little grin, the one that never touched her eyes. "You know, we've been thinking about building something. Maybe a little weekend place, get out of the city. Wouldn't that be nice? You'd be so close. We could all be together." I didn't answer. I just wiped my hands on my jeans and stared at her, long and quiet, until the silence turned stiff. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the will open again. My husband, Joe, had handwritten a note and tucked it into the folder years before he passed. He'd scrawled in his shaky hand, "Patsy, this land is yours. Use it if you need it, but don't trust easy. Some smiles are snakeskin." He knew. Somehow he always knew. Thomas, my sweet boy, was changing too. Not all at once, but in slivers, more withdrawn, tired in the eyes. And one evening, when he came by alone and we sat watching the sun sink behind the hills, he let something slip. "She's been talking to developers," he muttered, barely above a whisper. "Keeps saying this land could set us up for life." My heart thudded. "Did she tell you to ask me?" He flinched. Didn't answer. Just stared at his hands like a boy caught in a lie. It was happening. The thing I'd feared from the very start. The first real blow came 2 weeks later, folded inside a pale blue envelope that smelled faintly of Elise's perfume. It was a letter, no return address, just my name in her looping cursive. Inside, a typed note on thick ivory paper, no greeting, no warmth. Just business. "Patricia, given the family's interest in optimizing long-term financial security, we've consulted a property attorney regarding the transfer and development of the Llano Ranch. Attached is a preliminary proposal from Hillstone Land Holdings. Thomas and I hope you'll review it with an open mind." There was more, but my eyes stopped there. My stomach twisted. I stared at the second page, a slick printed packet outlining conversion potential, maximized acreage, and worst of all, family-owned parcel ideal for acquisition. Acquisition. As if this land was a leftover lot behind a strip mall, not the place where I buried my husband, where Thomas took his first steps, where our old dog Rusty was still buried under the live oak out back. I didn't call them. I couldn't. Instead, I drove straight out to the west pasture that evening, parked the truck, and sat under that same live oak for a long, long while. My hands shook, and for the first time in years, I wept like a widow again. I could feel Joe's absence so loud it rang in my ears, and I whispered out loud, "I kept it, Joe. I did. I never said a word. I kept it. But maybe I should have. Maybe I should have told Thomas what he was marrying into. Maybe I should have warned him that Elise wasn't just after a husband. She was after legacy." That night I finally phoned him. "Come out here," I said. "Alone. Tomorrow." He hesitated. "Is everything okay?" "Just come." He arrived late the next afternoon, driving too fast down the gravel road like he used to when he was 16 and reckless. When he stepped out of the truck, I saw the boy in him, the one who used to bring me wildflowers and beg for peach pie. But there was something dimmer in his eyes now, something pressed down. I handed him the envelope. He didn't open it right away, just stood there, face pale, jaw tight. "She said she sent you something." "And what do you say, Thomas?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer. Instead, he opened the letter, read both pages, then folded them neatly again and handed them back to me. "I didn't agree to this," he said. But I saw the lie, clear as day, twitch in his cheek. I just nodded. "Walk with me." We crossed the field together, like we used to, the wind tugging at our clothes. The sun was low, the grass gold. When we got to the old barn, I stopped and opened the side door. Inside, neatly stacked and untouched, were all the old family photo albums, Joe's saddle, and boxes of papers from a time before Thomas even knew how to write his name. "This is what she wants," I said, placing my hand on the saddle. "Not just the land, the story, the inheritance, the legacy." He stared at the saddle like it was foreign. "You've told her things," I said. "Things you shouldn't have." He looked at me then, really looked. "She said it would help, that maybe if you knew we were serious, you'd be more willing to give it away?" "No," he said, though even he didn't sound convinced. "To share." I closed the barn door gently. "Thomas," I said, my voice low, steady, "you already did." I didn't sleep that night, not a wink. Every creak in the old house made me flinch. Every howl of the coyotes out past the fence line sounded like a warning. I lay there thinking about my boy, about Elise, about the long, silent years since Joe passed and all the things I never said. I thought about the day he'd handed me the deed and kissed my hand, saying, "This land will protect you longer than I ever could." And I thought about how close I'd come to losing it all by doing nothing. By morning, I had made up my mind. I called my lawyer, told her I needed to come in person, and bring the original will. I hadn't changed a thing since Joe died, but now I would. Later that day, while I was gone, Elise showed up again, only this time I wasn't there to catch her snooping. It was Darlene, my neighbor, who phoned me with the breathless report. Said she saw Elise out in the back pasture talking to a man in slacks with a clipboard and sunglasses. "I thought it was Thomas at first," she said, "but this fellow was older, had that slick look, the kind who calls everything a development opportunity." I gripped the phone tighter. "Did they go near the house?" "No, just pointed at the land. Took some pictures. Then she drove off like the Queen of England." When I got home, I checked the cameras I'd had installed after Joe died. Sure enough, there she was, Elise, walking with that man in his shiny shoes, nodding like she already owned the place. She didn't even flinch when she looked straight up at the camera above the tool shed, like she knew I was watching, like she wanted me to see. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power, control. Elise wanted to plant her flag on my land the same way she'd planted it on my son. Thomas didn't come around after our talk in the barn. Not for a few days, anyway. And when he did, he wasn't alone. They pulled up together, Elise wearing a crisp white blouse and a little leather folder tucked under her arm like she was heading into a meeting. I stood on the porch and waited. "Patricia," she said with that too sweet tone, "I think we need to talk as a family." "No," I said, stepping down onto the gravel. "You two can talk. I'll listen." She glanced at Thomas, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. He was sweating, even though the breeze was cool that day. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," Elise began, opening her folder and pulling out a glossy printout of aerial photos and zoning maps. "We've been exploring possibilities. Nothing's final, of course, but it would be wise, for everyone, to start thinking about the future of this property. Taxes, maintenance, value. We could lease part of it, even keep the house if you wanted. But if we don't act soon—" "Stop!" I didn't raise my voice, but I said it sharp enough to make her flinch. "Put that paper away, Elise." She blinked. "I'm trying to help." I looked at Thomas. His eyes flicked to the porch, the barn, the hills behind me, all the places he used to love. "Son," I said gently, "have you walked this land lately? Really walked it?" He didn't answer. "Elise," I went on, "do you know where the spring is? Where the soil softens near the creek bed? Where Joe carved our initials into that tree after our first fight and came back the next day with roses from the roadside?" Her lips parted slightly. "No," I said for her. "You don't." Thomas took a step forward. "Mom, we're just trying to build a future. And I'm trying to protect the past." I turned and opened the screen door, stepped halfway inside, then looked back at them. "You've both made yourselves clear. Now let me be clear in return." I pulled out a thick envelope. It was still warm from the lawyer's office. "This land," I said, holding it up, "is going into a trust. My name on it, and no one, no buyer, no developer, no spouse, will touch it while I'm alive." Elise's face cracked just slightly. "And Thomas. God help me." He looked relieved. They came back one more time. It was late autumn then, the pecan trees losing their leaves and the fields quieting down before the frost. I was on the porch shelling peas when I heard their car again. Elise's tires crunching slow over the gravel, deliberate, like a warning bell. But it wasn't her who got out first. It was Thomas. No folder this time, no suit jacket. Just my son in an old hoodie, hands shoved in his pockets like he used to do when he was little and knew he was about to disappoint me. Elise stepped out after him, slower than usual. Her hair was pulled back tight, and she didn't have that sugary smile. She looked hard, real, like someone who just realized the door she'd been planning to walk through had been bricked over behind her back. They didn't ask to come in. They just stood at the bottom of the steps while I kept shelling. "Mom," Thomas said, "we need to talk." "Then talk." Elise glanced up at me, chin high. "You've made your point. We understand. But you didn't have to humiliate us." "I didn't do anything of the kind," I said quietly. "I protected what was mine. You made me look like a gold digger." "Did I?" I didn't blink. Thomas looked at her, then down at his feet. "She's pregnant," he said. I stopped shelling. The pea rolled out of my hand and landed in my lap. Elise's eyes never left mine. "That's why we've been pushing," she said. "We're starting a family. We wanted to build something that would last." I could feel the wind shift. I could feel Joe's presence again, the same way I did when I needed him most. Quiet, steady, like a hand on my shoulder. "You don't build something that lasts," I said, "by tearing down what already stood the test of time." Elise's lip twitched. "It's not just about you anymore." "No," I said, "it's about the child. And that's why I did what I did." She blinked. "I protected this land for them," I said, looking at my son, "for your child. So they'd know where they came from, so they'd have something sacred, untouched by greed or short-term schemes." Thomas's eyes glistened. "We just thought, if we could make something from it, maybe we'd finally feel like it was ours too." I stood then, walked down the steps slow, my knees creaking with every board. "Thomas," I said, placing my hand on his cheek, "it is yours, but not the way she wants it to be. It's yours in the stories, the soil, the sweat that built it. It's yours because your father died, making sure you'd still have it one day." He leaned his forehead against mine for a moment, just a second, and I felt his tears touch my skin. "I'm sorry, Mama," he whispered. "I forgot." Then Elise stepped back. Just one small step, but it told me everything. She was already leaving, not just the porch, not just that moment, but us. She'd lost, and she knew it. 2 days later, Thomas showed up alone. Said she'd gone to stay with her sister, said she might not come back. And I held him as he cried, just like when he was a boy who scraped his knee and didn't want to show how bad it hurt. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't need to. It was early winter by then, the kind of cold that settles in your joints and makes every breath feel sharp. I just lit the first fire of the season in the front room, the smell of cedarwood rising like a memory through the house, when Thomas showed up again. He didn't knock, just let himself in the way he always used to, quietly, respectfully. I was in Joe's old armchair, mending one of the quilt corners, but I set it down when I heard the door creak. His face looked worn, thinner, sadder, but his eyes were clearer, as if something heavy had finally been set down. "She's not coming back," he said, standing in the doorway like he wasn't sure he belonged anymore. I didn't ask questions. I just nodded and said, "You hungry?" He smiled. "Starving." We didn't talk much while we ate, just the clink of forks, the soft whistle of wind pressing against the window panes. And when we finished, he helped me wash the dishes, just like when he was little, except now his shoulders were broader, his hands calloused from years of work and maybe a little too much silence. When we sat back down, he stared into the fire for a long while before speaking again. She wanted the kind of life I never promised, he said. One with gates and glass and high-rise plans, not dirt roads and pecan trees. I reached for his hand. And what do you want? He was quiet a long time. Then he said, I want to fix the fence on the North Ridge, and I want to show my kid how to ride before they're old enough to say no. Tears filled my eyes, but I kept my voice steady. You'll need boots for that. He grinned. Already bought some. We didn't speak of Elise again that night. Not her schemes, not her folder, not the way she tried to carve her name into land that didn't know her. That didn't want to. Instead, I told him about his father's favorite tree, the one that still blooms late, the one we almost cut down once before we knew better. And I showed him the box of old photographs, Joe on the tractor, baby Thomas in the saddle, my smile caught between two sunburnt cheeks. He stayed the night, slept in his old room, the one I'd never changed, and the next morning, when I brought him coffee on the porch, he was already out there, staring across the fields. He turned to me and said, Mama, can I bring the baby here when it's born? I didn't trust myself to speak. I just nodded and pulled the quilt tighter around my shoulders. One night after putting her down, he came out onto the porch and sat beside me in Joe's old chair. The stars were bright, brighter than I'd seen them in years, maybe because I'd forgotten how to look up for a while. She calls this place magic, he said, gazing out over the dark hills. It is, I said. You just had to come home to see it. He looked over at me then, and I saw something I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Peace. Not the kind you fake for company, but the kind that settles in your bones when you finally stop running from what was always yours. I was scared, he said, that if I stayed here, I'd lose everything I thought I was supposed to want. And? He smiled. Turns out I was just chasing noise. She saw land, you saw legacy. Now I see both. We sat there in silence for a long time, listening to the creak of the windmill and the soft rustle of leaves, 3 generations under one roof, held together by fences that still stood. That night, I opened the last letter Joe ever wrote me. I'd kept it sealed all these years, hidden behind the spice tins. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. If you're reading this, it means you kept the land. I knew you would. And if Thomas ever finds his way back to it, trust him. He just needs time to remember who he is. I folded the letter back and pressed it to my chest. He was right, as always. This land isn't just earth and fence posts. It's breath and blood. It's promises kept and the kind of love that doesn't shout. It stays, even when no one's looking. So here I am. Older now, slower, sure, but full. Because I didn't speak too soon. I didn't give in. I waited and I watched. And in the end, what mattered found its way home.